All right, you guys. Good afternoon, and good afternoon, gals, too, and everybody. My name is Bonnie Parker. I work for the Capital Area MPO here in North Carolina in the Raleigh area. And I am going to go ahead and kick our meeting off this afternoon. I think some folks will continue to join us, but as you can see here below on this home screen or welcome screen, we do have call-in information. Some folks may end up having technology issues, including myself. I may cut my video here shortly. But if you are having technology issues, if you prefer to remain anonymous, whatever, you can always just listen in to this meeting by calling into the call-in numbers. And our team who is going to be helping with the chat today is going to post that phone number in the chat box as well. Thanks, Daniel. We want to welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. This is our second public information session for the phase that we're currently in as we develop the 2050 MTP. We had a noon session today that was well attended, and it looks like our attendance is growing for this final session today at 4:30. We will be posting the meeting recordings online, and that website is shown there. That's also going to magically appear in our chat. Let's see what else. Just want to let you know that all the attendees are muted. If we get to a point at the end where it does make sense to unmute someone with a complicated question or something like that, we will have that option, but we'll put that option out there toward the end of the meeting. Any questions that you may have, we're going to hold for the question and answer period, which is really the whole second half of today's info session. So there will be lots of time for questions and getting them answered, and we'd love to hear your comments as well. But as far as these panels go, over on the right side of your screen, for those of you who are viewing as well, on the right side, you should have both a chat box and a Q&A box. And we'd like to try to keep the chat box to administrative items or technology items, things about the meeting today logistically. If you have questions that are related to the MTP that we can answer as we go along or later, if you would put those in that Q&A panel box, that's where we're going to draw questions from later during that questions and answer period. We also have a couple other things here. We have a quick poll that is an anonymous poll, but I'm going to go ahead and launch it. It too is going to show up in the panel on the right. If you could answer these three questions, we want to make sure that we're getting a good geographic representation of our entire Research Triangle region. So we're asking, what is your home zip code? What is your work zip code, and how did you find out about today's info session? You can click more than one option there, but if you would go ahead and take that poll answering those three questions, again, I'm simply going to close the poll here in a few seconds. We are not going to show the results. It's for our information for measuring the performance of our outreach. So it looks like just about half of our attendees have responded. I'm going to give folks a few more seconds here to take the poll. Again, it's in the panel on the right. Hopefully people are able to see it. And at this moment, I can't remember if I introduced myself or not. I've already mixed our two public information sessions together. My name is Bonnie Parker from Campo. I'm the public engagement planner for this side of the triangle, and we'll be serving as your moderator today, and you'll hear from me some more later during the question and answer period. I'll be directing most of those questions to our presenters. Okay, folks, I'm going to close that poll. Thank you all for submitting your responses. WebEx just let me know that it's going to leave the poll open for a few more seconds, and then it will close on their end as well. So in addition to myself, we have two other presenters that are going to deliver most of our content today. The first is Andy Henry. He is the Senior Transportation Planner for the Durham Chapel Hill Carborough MPO, and he is going to kick us off by explaining exactly what a metropolitan planning organization is and what we do here in the Triangle. We also have Shelby Powell. She is our Deputy Director at Campo, the Capital Area MPO, more on the eastern side of the Triangle. And she's going to be helping with parts of the presentation as well, going into some of our scenarios and explaining them for all of you. So I think I covered all the logistics. Andy, if you notice that I missed something, feel free to add that in. And with that, if Andy, you want to go ahead and kick off our presentation for folks.
Okay, I think if you have a question, you can put it in the chat. Is that right? And then at the end, we'll go through the questions and answer them for you. Again, I'm Andy Henry, DCHC MPO, Durham Cardinal Chapel Hill MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization. I want to explain very briefly what MPOs are. We're responsible for the planning and the programming of transportation investments in the region. That's the state and federal funding. And we work very closely with North Carolina Department of Transportation, NCDOT. We're close with the local jurisdictions and the counties to make that happen. Why is the MTP important? Metropolitan Transportation Plan. This designates all our future transportation investments, the ones we think we need to make, projects we need to implement in order to meet our expected travel demand for the year 2050. So we have to start planning now. It's important for a couple of reasons. There's a document that the MPOs and the NCDOT are responsible for. It's called the Transportation Improvement Program. It's a 10-year funding document. That's where it shows how projects are going to get funded. It designates the funding. Can't put a project into the TIP unless that project is already in the MTP. So it's important. If you want to see that project get implemented in the future, it has to be in the MTP in order to get into that funding document. The other thing is local jurisdictions. When a developer comes in and lays their plans down, if there's a new road or road widening or some type of fixed guideway transit, they're going to require that right of way is dedicated or reserved. So in the future, when we try to make those, when we try to implement those projects, we're not tearing down structures. So a couple of reasons why the MTP is important. Next slide. So back in last fall, we did our goals, objectives, and we lined those up with our performance measures. These are the steps I'm going through here. The next one is the analysis and evaluation. We did a deficiency analysis to identify where we thought there were going to be deficiencies in our transportation system by the year 2050. And now we put out a set of alternatives to go ahead and meet those deficiencies. And then also, next step is a preferred option. That's really another name for a draft plan. I think Campo is going to release theirs in September. DCHC MPO will do it in October. And then we'll both come back in December, approve that plan, and then send it back out with the air quality conformity determination to make sure that we're not going to go over our emissions budgets, right? Pollutant budget, and come back in January, February, and adopt the plans. So that's the process. Next slide. Just very briefly, you can see that we're adding a lot of people, 1.2 million people, there'll be 3.1 million people in the triangle in the year 2050, and we're adding 850,000 jobs. And so we'll have 1.85 million jobs. That's a lot. And you can see we have some of our goals and objectives there on the right. They have to do with climate change. They have to do with congestion. They have a lot of visions for our area. And so that's the challenge. How are we going to go out there and provide travel, transportation for this quick growing area and still meet those goals? I know recently there's been some census data that came out. Johnston County, I think, grew 28% from 2010. Wake County was 25%. Remember, Durham was 21%, and Chatham County was 20%. Very fast growing counties here in the triangle. So that's quite a challenge we have in front of us. Next slide. So our baseline scenario, we already did what's called a deficiency and need scenario. And basically that is no build scenario. So we go out and in our model, we put the population employment from the year 2050 into our model. And then we make a few additions to our transportation network, but not very many, just the ones that are already kind of coming out of the ground. And we go, we see where we're missing it. So it's kind of like a no build scenario. On the left, you can see all that red. That's the congestion on the roadway system and that deficiency and needs one. It's not very realistic. I don't think we're going to stop building roadways and and delivering transit services in the next couple of years until the year 2050. But it helps us as a baseline as we compare our different alternatives. Next slide. So the alternatives, this is a matrix, and on the top you have the mobility investment. So those are the highways, the transit services, et cetera, that you're going to have. And then on the left side, we have the land use. the development foundation. And that's where the population and employment is going to be located. You know, the different densities, the different mixes. And so in the middle, you have combinations of those, and those are different scenarios. You know, if you look, the one there that's green deficiency needs scenario, I already talked about that. That's made out of the existing and committed mobility investments. So it's pretty much the existing network with a few committed projects, and then our community plans development foundation. And so these are all different combinations of two major factors again. It's what the transportation network has to provide that service, and also the development foundation. Next slide. First one I'll talk about is the plans and trends scenario. It's based on local land use plans. It's based on where we are, you know, it's just an extension of the land use plans that we have now. I kind of call this the business as usual. That sounds kind of negative sometimes, so maybe it's better if we call it steady as she goes. And basically, we're going to keep implementing our land use plans and policies as they are now. We'll implement our transportation improvement program, you know, over the next 10 years, and we'll continue investing monies as we have been over the last several years. So that's kind of an extension in the future. And as we go through these different scenarios, each one of these scenarios will build on each other. So this is kind of a basic. It's not our base scenario, but this is a basic scenario of just the existing trends that we have. Next slide. In that trend scenario, what we're assuming in the transportation network, there's a lot of projects here. I'm not going to go over all of them, but some of the key ones, we're going to finish the 540 outer loop. As you can see, we're making improvements to all the interstates and all the major roadways. One important element is the commuter rail going from West Durham over to Clayton, and that is at kind of a low-level service. People say 8282, and what that means is 8 trains during the peak, 2 trains during the off-peak. So that's kind of a low service level. We're assuming the 3 BRT projects in Raleigh, and also implementing the Wake Transit Plan, and we have one BRT project in Chapel Hill. So those are the set of projects, the main ones that we have in the trend scenario. Next slide. So then, can you go forward? Yeah, and go forward again. There we go. Yeah. So the next two are the shared leadership and the all together. They have the same land use scenario, the same development foundation. And what is different about that development foundation from the trends is that we've increased some of the development at what we call the anchor institutions. That would be, for instance, UNC Chapel Hill, Duke, NC State, some of the big institutions. Also, we'd have more intense and more mixed-use development at our employment centers. There's a couple dozen employment centers around the triangle. So, you know, this is a more intense, higher density, more mixed-use scenario. Also, in the frequent transit corridors, we would include more transit-oriented development on any parcels that can be developed, and also we have more transit service, et cetera, to some of the affordable housing sites in the plan. So that's the more intense land use that we would have for the shared leadership and the all together scenarios. Next slide. So I talked about the land use for those two scenarios. Just briefly talk about some of the roadway investments. Again, we have the same improvements basically as the plans and trends, but there's some additional roadway improvements. We had some minor arterials in the Western Triangle on the DCHC MPO side. In terms of the commuter rail, we're extending the commuter rail to Clayton, and we're moving that. I think between West Durham and Raleigh, we would have a high service level. So we'd say 12-8, 12-8. That means 12 trains during the peak, 8 trains during the off-peak. So quite a step up in the service level we're assuming there for the commuter rail. There'd also be a commuter rail from down to Apex and up to Wake Forest, and there'd be an additional BRT, bus rapid transit system between Durham and Chapel Hill. So that's the shared leadership scenario. That's the transportation for the shared leadership. Then there's the alternatives analysis, or excuse me, I'm sorry, the all-together scenario. Again, it's the same as the shared leadership, but there's a couple changes. The important one for Campo is that there's a higher level secondary roadway investments in the second 2 decades. And it's given the way the transportation funding comes to the MPOs these days, it's a bit difficult to fund some of those roadways, but we're assuming some changes, and we would have more of those secondary roads, more of those roads that that run parallel to I-40 and the inner belt, the belt line, and then the outer loop. Those roadways would have some improvements. In the altogether, there's also a commuter rail extension to Selma, going east, and then out to Mebane out west, and then the commuter rail that went up to Wake Forest would go up to Franklinton. There's also a couple of additional bus rapid transits assumed in there, one between downtown Durham and RTP, which would use the NC 147 or the Durham Freeway, and then one between Chapel Hill and RTP along NC 54. One thing I did not mention yet, on the highway side on the DCHC, it's a little bit different. We added a lot of the collector and local roads, a little bit similar to what Campo did in the secondary roads, but we pulled back some of the investments on the major roadways. For instance, along 15501 between Durham and Chapel Hill, and NC 147 between downtown Durham and RTP, because we have bus rapid transit, BRT investments in those corridors. So that was one change that we made. Next slide. I'm going to go ahead and Shelby Powell is going to take over from here. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, I'm Shelby Powell with the Capital Area MPO, and I'm just going to go through a few of these pictures with you that kind of show the outcomes of the scenario work that Andy has just described. So just to orient you with what you're looking at here, on the left-hand side of the screen is the peak hour travel network or travel traffic, and on the right side of the screen is the rest of the day, so the non-rush hour kind of traffic. If you look at the middle where the circle is there, that's Raleigh, and you can see the 440 and the 540 loops, and then to the left side is Durham. And both of these maps are exactly the same other than the times of day. So if you look at this map as kind of a green to red, as a good to bad level of congestion, that's what we're looking at here. It's showing the volume of traffic that's traveling on the roads as compared to the amount of traffic the roads were designed to carry, or the capacity. So if the volume is way higher than what the capacity can handle, it gets red. If it's starting to approach that capacity, it's yellow. And if it's doing okay, if the volume, if the capacity is there to handle the volumes that are on the road, it's green. So, excuse me. So this is our 2025 transportation network. So basically looking at the traffic that would be in place in 2025 if all the projects that we currently have on the books that are under development or under construction right now are completed by 2025, and the land use that we have on the ground is as existing for all the communities in the triangle. And so if you go to the next slide, this is looking at that same land use, but on a 2050 network. So some things here that you might notice that get completed are the 540 outer loop. There's some other road improvements that Andy talked about on the earlier slides that are shown here. And so, Bonnie, if you can just toggle back and forth between these two for a second, you can see the growth in traffic between 2025 and 2050. So that's 25 years worth of additional vehicular growth layered over the current land use that we have in place. You can see some slight changes there. These maps are also available on our website so that you can kind of zoom in and look at areas that are of specific concern to you to see what those changes are when we make these changes in scenarios. Okay, thanks. Can you go on to the shared leadership slide, please? So this is showing that same transportation network for 2050 with some additional projects on it that are as part of the shared leadership scenario. And also the land use on this map has changed. So the underlying assumptions of where people are living, where people are working, and how they're getting to and from those jobs, if it's by car or by transit, that's all built into this network. So this one is based on that land use changes that Andy talked about that are the opportunity places and the mobility corridors. It does have the similar transportation network to the Plans and Trends network, but we've increased some frequencies on transit and made some major highway investment to help mobility along those corridors. And then go forward one more, please, Bonnie. This is that all together scenario. So again, this is with that more aspirational land use. that is building up some density around our transit stations. This scenario also includes additional investment into transit in the Campo area and in the DCHC area. It includes some additional investment into the secondary road network. It has the more expansive commuter rail lines that Andy talked about. So you see that there's fewer vehicles traveling on the roads, and it's got the build out of the bus rapid transit that's planned in both the Wake Transit studies and in the 15501 corridor in the Durham, Chapel Hill, Carborough MPO area. So if you can toggle back and forth between those two, Bonnie, just a few times. My internet might be dragging a bit, but I encourage you to do this on your own, and you can really see where some of those changes pop up. Some of the congestion is going down because we have that more expansive transit network and because we have some more investment happening on our secondary road network as well. And a lot of this, again, is reliant on the changing assumptions about land use that's underlying these maps, because it's directing a lot more density to be along those mobility corridors. And this one is showing travel time. So this map is centered on downtown Raleigh, there in the middle in the dark green. And this is showing under that shared leadership scenario how far you could travel within 20 minutes, which is that darker green, how far you could travel within 40 minutes, which is the lighter green, how far you could travel within 60 minutes, which is the tan, and then how far you could travel within 80 minutes, which is that, I don't know, brown. So you can see the expected travel time with the land use and the transportation network as part of the shared leadership scenario offers you this kind of travel time from downtown Raleigh in the year 2050. You can go to the next one, Bonnie. And this is the all-together scenario, which again bumps up the transit networks and does more secondary road improvements. If you want to toggle back and forth between those two so you can kind of see the differences, again, not great differences in these two, but there are some shifts in how far you can travel in the region, which are reliant on some of these transportation networks that we are putting in place in these scenarios. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is showing the same thing, but this time it's centered on the airport, on Raleigh-Durham Airport. So you can see under the shared leadership scenario in 2050, how far you'd be able to get in 20, 40, and 60 minutes from the airport, which is you know, of interest to folks working in economic development in the region. And then this is the altogether scenario there you can see. So you can see some shifts again when you're trying to get from the airport to other parts of the region in the year 2050 with these investments in place. And then I think I'm passing it back to Andy to go through these performance measures that are part of these scenarios as well.
Yeah, thank you. These are the key performance measures. This is an infographic, but if you go to the websites, either DCHC or Campo, there's a lot of other performance measures on there that have to do with mode choice. In other words, what percentage of the trips are by bus or by automobile. There's additional information about safety and travel time, reliability. So a lot of information here. We pulled several up here just to give you a look. These are separated in columns. Far left, you got the deficiency and needs. Again, that's the no build. Then we get the plans and trends next. That's the business as usual. And then the shared leadership and all together, the next two. One thing I didn't mention earlier that I should have is the plans and trends land use. You know, that's all in the comprehensive plans and policies of the local jurisdictions and counties right now. For shared leadership and all together, we've made some assumptions that there be some changes to those policies. So these last two scenarios, some of the improvements you see with them, part of it is the transportation system, and part of it is that more intense, more mixed use land use, but it's incumbent on the local jurisdictions and the counties to implement that. Okay, so the first couple rows you see there, the average auto commute time, as you move from left to right, you know, DCHC, the average auto commute time, 24 minutes, Campo, 34 minutes. As you move right, it continues to improve. It's down to 21 and 26 minutes for the two MPOs when you get to that in the end. The next couple delays, this shows the minutes of delay as you move from left to right. Again, for DCHC, the third row there, Campo, the fourth row, it improves. However, on that last one, the altogether, it goes up a little bit for DCHC, but you'll remember that I made a comment that for the transportation network for DCHC, for the altogether, we actually pulled out some of the major transportation highway projects in favor of some of the transit projects in those corridors. So that might be affecting that. If you move down the roads there, I'm going to skip over some of these other ones, lane miles, et cetera. You see transit ridership improves, the jobs near transit, DCHC and Campo. DCHC is 23% and Campo is 19% in that baseline, the deficiency. But as you move over to the right, it increases up to 66 and 44% for 2 MPOs. The increase in gas consumption, as you move left to right, it was 15% in the baseline. The increase goes down to 16% in the altogether. However, it jumps up pretty high in the plans and trends. So if we keep going like we are, gas consumption is going to go up 23%, but it'll go down if we implement some of the other policies, et cetera, we have in the last 2 scenarios. And then the funding at the very bottom line, the plans and trends, we're assuming that the way we receive and the way the transportation funding is distributed today continues going on. So we got $3 signs there. The next one, shared leadership, we got those same $3 signs, but we're adding some state funding. We're assuming that the recommendations from the NC First Commission are acted on, and we get that additional funding that they recommend. When I say we, I mean the state of North Carolina, but the 2 MPOs would draw down some of that funding. And the last row altogether, we're assuming that those $3 signs are regular level of money, and then we're assuming the added state, and then we're assuming some level of local funding. We know in the past that Wake County, Orange County, and Durham County have all passed the half-cent sales tax. So we know there's some possibilities for additional local funding, and we've assumed that in the last one, the altogether. So again, go to the website. There's a lot more performance data, a lot more metrics, and as Shelby mentioned a few minutes ago, there's a lot of interactive maps where you can get a better idea and you can kind of zero in on your area. Okay, equity measures. We have some measures where we're looking at, we're separating out, for instance, low income, minority areas, also zero car households, and we're measuring those. We don't have those yet. We're working on them. So one thing I wanted to make sure is that we don't lose sight of some of our equity concerns. And so I've reproduced this slide here, or Bonnie's actually helped me reproduce this slide from the Integrated Mobility Division from CDOT. I thought it was a very good one. It says a lot. So in North Carolina, it says on average, communities of color have lower vehicle ownership rates, live further from work, they're more likely to depend on public transportation, and are more likely to be involved in a crash as a pedestrian. So many challenges for some of those communities. And you can see in that lower right corner in that box that if you are dependent on transit, well, your average commute is 43 minutes in North Carolina. But if you don't have to depend on transit, it's down to 24 minutes in the auto. So some disparities there. And we need to keep these in mind as we move forward and develop our project list and our investments for the preferred option or our draft plan. Next slide. Quickly, I'll go over, right now, we've got our alternatives analysis up for public comment, and we're getting our feedback and looking and summarizing that feedback. As I said earlier, Campo, I believe, will publish their draft plan. We call the preferred option in September. DCHC MPO will put that out in October. I think both MPOs will have what we call public hearing in November at the board meetings where we want to address the board directly on that preferred option to do so. And then in December, the MPO boards would approve the 2050 MTP, and then it goes into it'll go out with the air quality conformity determination to make sure that the plan helps us meet our emissions budgets. And they both come back then and will adopt the 2050 MTP with the air quality determination in January or February. I think that's it.
Mowing the lawn. Okay, thanks, Andy. So that is the overview of the current alternative scenarios that are available for consideration here with the 2050 MTP. We want to make sure to remind everybody about the different public engagement opportunities that are going on right now through the month of August. There is a lot of information. We send you to a landing page here, the publicinput.com/triangle MTP development. That page then it sort of serves as a place where you can launch to DCHC information and Campo information. We're really trying to do our best to make sure that we're making this convenient for folks who are interested in the entire region, when this region includes 2 major metropolitan areas. So we also have an online survey. It's going to be closing on August 29th. It should take something like 2 to 5 minutes. It's a very short survey where we're asking folks to weigh in on key priorities for decision makers as they identify elements of the preferred scenario, or of the scenarios that they would like to see in a preferred scenario. And we will be out in the community at some in-person pop-up events during both August and September. Campo and DCHC are planning that. And so we will keep the pop-ups updated on our website, and we'll be using social media to advertise a lot of those when they are about to occur. So now we want to jump into the questions and comments that folks may have. We're going to leave this slide up so that you guys can capture any of these links and contact information. I appreciate Daniel, again, has put the links over in the chat. If you do have questions, if you could please direct them to the Q&A panel box. There are no dumb questions. We certainly learned during the 12 o'clock session that was the case, and we want to make sure in these meetings that we are communicating clearly anything that folks may be wondering about the MTP process. So we do have a few questions I'm going to go ahead and pose. I think, Andy, I'm going to start with you. Heidi was asking, how is the road capacity determined for the roads? And this was, I think she was wondering this. I said I was going to leave the slide alone, but I'm actually not. Back when we were talking about the deficiency in needs. Do you know the answer for that, Andy? Are we assuming single occupancy vehicles?
Yeah, so it's done in the triangle regional model. What they do is they look at the number of lanes. They look and see if it's divided or undivided. They look at the intensity of traffic signals, and they put all that data together, and then that produces a capacity for the roadway. The triangle regional model is actually figured on a level of service of E. And I say that because I know NCDOT a lot of times uses level service D. So what does level of service mean? Well, A is free flow, B is, you're starting to get a little backup, C is you have to pay a little more time. Once you get to D, you're starting to interact with drivers a little more, slowing down. Level of service E is pretty heavy. And that's where our model is calibrated at a level of service D. So once you get up to 100% of capacity on a roadway, it's, you're gonna have some delay in your commute or your drive. Level of service F is the worst level, and that's when you really get some backups and you get traffic stopping when you're not even close to an intersection. So I hope that helps explain where we get that information, the capacity information from.
Thanks, Andy. And then similarly, moving over to the Isochrome Maps, the travel time scenarios, we were also wondering, is that by car, or does it also take into account other modes and specifically transit? If not, maybe in the future we could do a transit side by side with the roadways. But for the first part of the question, Andy, do you know, or Shelby, I know these are Campo maps. Are these just assumed to be about commuter travel by car or personal vehicle?
Yeah, it's auto travel, and that's a good point to do a transit travel time map. I mean, I think you saw in those key performance measures we can track the number of jobs and some other information on that's within the bus routes, but that would be an interesting travel time map. That's a good idea. We've done these auto commute ones so much that I've never thought of challenging the modeling team to produce one related to transit. We do have some transit. Go ahead, Mike.
Andy and Bonnie, this is Mike Ruff. We do have the transit isochrome maps. We just didn't include them in this presentation. Somebody actually asked for those this morning as well. But we can add them to the website. They're not currently on there, but they are available.
Great, thanks, Mike. We'll do that. Mike, I don't know if you can answer this as well. Do we have maps of the frequent transit corridors that are, PDF or viewable?
We do.
Okay.
Tim shortly can provide those. They may be on the website somewhere, but we can check with him.
Okay. MG Bell, this is Bonnie. If you want to send privately your email address, I'll make sure to send a link to that to you. Otherwise, we will make sure that that's something that's sort of highlighted on the website so that you can ultimately go back and look and find it. Another quick question here on Chapel Hill is where Chapel Hill, is it in the map? And that they little concerned they may have missed it. And I will quickly say that some of these slides are more campo-centric as we were pulling our graphics together. So Chapel Hill certainly is in all of the model stuff. But Andy, do you want to confirm that?
Yeah, if you want some views of that same, the congestion map and some other views on the location of population, employment, et cetera, if you go to the DCHC MPO website, we have those maps, and they're the same style of maps. You can click on them, you can focus in closer or come out further. But that Chapel Hill is definitely in the region. This is Chapel Hill's been cut off here because we just kind of picked up the kind of the core region, actually where the worst congestion is. So, but yeah, on the DCHC MPO website, Chapel Hill's included in that. And with the increases of population, employment, you'll see those numbers as well. We've broken that out.
Andy, will you elaborate a little bit on the opportunity places? I need to find that slide. The key and the key mobility, the Halo hubs, and the anchor institutions. You gave the example of the anchor institutions as the universities. Will you go into the hubs?
Yeah, my understanding is the mobility hubs are more places that have high levels of employment. Downtown Durham would certainly be one. RTP, some of the other areas throughout the region. So those will be the mobility hubs. They're places where we want to have high levels of transportation, especially transit, in those areas. So, I mean, if someone wants a map or some information on that, I can get that. Our friends at TJ Cog were the ones that did the land use side, so they set up, the community plan and these different land use plans here. So I could get that information if someone were interested in. Okay,
thanks, Andy. We did have a few other more specific questions. Shelby, I'm not sure if you would start off with this one. This morning, at noon and this evening, or afternoon, we've also gotten questions about the US 401 corridor study and how that fits into the MTP. Would you be able to speak to that briefly?
Sure, the US 401 corridor study and how that fits into the MTP. So all the planning work that we do at the MPO eventually builds up into the MTP. Currently, the US 401, there's a bypass and some improvements to existing 401 facility. Those are shown on the MTP right now. We are doing that corridor study to figure out what the actual alignment of those things need to look like so that the communities in those areas can begin reserving right of way and protecting it from development so that eventually the road can be built. And that process will identify an alignment, and then that alignment will get put into the MTP on the MTP maps. And that's the case with all the planning work that we do. We update this MTP, the major MTP plan, every 4 years, but we do a lot of planning work in the interim years that build up into recommendations on various corridor studies, just so we can try to be a little more precise with what we're planning for as far as, cross sections and locations of facilities and things like that.
Just to piggyback up on that idea, there's also on the DCHC side, there's a Durham County Transit Plan. They're in the public review stage right now. I think they'll release a final plan sometime in October, and so they'll be coming out about the same time as our preferred option. So we will do the best we can in the MTP to make sure that we've covered what we think are going to put transit projects we think are going to be in that plan. The Orange County Transit Plan is a little further behind, but again, we will do the best we can to cover the projects we think will be in that plan. If there is some type of mismatch when those two county plans are adopted, we will come back and amend the MTP. But I think since those plans go out to the year 2040 and the MTP goes out to 2050, we've got an extra 10 years. I think we can cover most of the contingencies that we would expect for those two plans. But anyways, that is one challenge, and kind of similar to your corridor study. One other point I don't think I clearly made yet, but I think most people understand it, but I just want to make sure is that we're not going to just pick up one of these alternatives, the altogether or the shared leadership, lock, stock, and barrel, and move that forward as our preferred option. We are going to kind of pick and choose the different projects and maybe the different land use policies from these options for our preferred option. So it's kind of a combination. We're not choosing an alternative in its entirety and moving it forward. So just want to make sure we're clear about that.
We have another one with regard to commuter rail. Is it meant to be ground level rail, or is it possible that we'll end up with raised monorails? Maybe something that's hybrid. Do we have those types of details on the planning for the CRT yet? Another public engagement effort that is currently underway?
The current commuter rail study that's underway that Go Triangle is overseeing is looking at the feasibility of commuter rail between Garner and Durham with some possible extensions beyond those points. And it's assumed right now to be looking at that existing rail line that's already in place. So it would be something operating on that rail line, which is not to say other future rail projects may, examine other technologies or other ways of conveyance. But the current commuter rail project that's being evaluated right now is considering putting it on the existing tracks or in the existing track right of way.
Okay, great. We have about 10 minutes left before our committed time to close the meeting, but we do have a couple other questions. The two that I'm seeing right now are more public engagement related. So early on, Heidi had asked a question about the survey, which was also posted on, I think, social media with regard to the first question in the survey. Similar to this meeting today, we asked folks for their home zip code and their work zip codes in the survey. And I personally, as a public engagement planner, thought this was a really good point, that we should really more be asking folks for their main mode of transportation. I think sometimes we get stuck in the, especially when we're doing the scenarios, really focusing on how we can improve things for the peak hours and such, and that can exclude some folks from making sure that we're representing them in terms of the zip code questions. But I think that's just a quick answer, not the only answer with regard to collecting that type of information. But Heidi, I appreciate that, and we definitely will look to make sure that that's a broader question in future surveys. The way our survey is right now, we can't go in and adjust that, or it's going to mess up our results. And then another question was,
you're talking about the survey that we had a few minutes ago for this session?
No, we are talking about the online survey. The online survey, remember at the beginning, asked people for their home and their work zip code as well. And the point is, if you ask people for their work, that's not as encompassing as what's your main mode or main place where you may go to, not just how do you get to work. So we appreciate that feedback very much. Another question we had was, how will the panel and this MTP development process actually utilize the community feedback for changing the plan? How will we actually influence the plan, really? For example, if folks say we want more train transit, we want more sidewalks and bicycle paths. So the quick answer there, I'll take this one as the public engagement planner, is twofold. One is when we did the first phase of public engagement for the 2050 MTP development, as it takes 18 months or so to be developed, almost a year ago now, at least 8 months or more, we went out to the community when we were trying to establish the goals and objectives for updating this MTP, and got a lot of that type of feedback on what should guide this MTP process. And that was taken very, very seriously by our decision makers. And the goals that you see have actually been adjusted a little bit over the last few years. And even those did relate more to focusing on other modes, additional emphasis on equity and things like that, and integrating the overall network so that we do more to emphasize choices. that's the first phase of engagement. Now we are in the second phase that's really trying to tease out from the community in, as you can see, some very complex technical data work. What are the key elements or attributes of these scenarios that we would like to carry into a preferred scenario? So we tried to, in a very broad way, ask the community that through the survey. And so far, we're getting good response rates, but we, would love for many, many more people to participate if you could help spread the word. But that information is going to be quickly synthesized and will influence the discussion and the decisions that move forward in our September and October timeframe, where our board members are discussing and deliberating around the preferred scenario and where we go from here. So I hope that helps to answer your questions. We obviously can't take 4 scenarios forward. So the community is going to influence where it's possible what the preferred scenario looks like. And then we'll be coming out again with that preferred scenario and pushing that back out to the community. It's not going to be a survey at that point. At that point, we are going to be asking people to take a look at what the scenario is or how, what the final scenario product is looking like and give us feedback on that. And with the preferred scenario, we'll also have a good list of the projects that's included in the preferred, and that may be adjusted based on that fiscal work that still has to be done to make sure we stay within an overall financially constrained plan. Andy and Shelby, did I explain that clearly enough? Jill, if you want to elaborate, feel free.
I would just add that on September 1st, you can address the DCHC MPO board directly. They have a public hearing on the alternatives analysis. If you go to our webpage, there's information on that. When they sit for that meeting, they get their packet a week ahead. We will have already provided them information on the survey, what we're hearing in the survey, what we're hearing in these public meetings, what emails I'm getting, et cetera. We will already provide all of that information to them and summarize it. So they'll have that, in the next couple of weeks.
And also, just to add on to what you were saying, Bonnie, part of this plan, we didn't talk a lot about it today, but there's a financial element to this plan. So we are required to have a final scenario that we think we can afford to do, given the financial resources that we have and can expect to be coming to the region between now and 2050. Obviously, a lot of things can change between now and 2050 financial wise, but we do have to have some kind of realistic expectations for some of that funding. So that's what our board is in place for, is to balance the desires of the community with some of those financial realities. The way the state kind of divvies out funding between the different modes and between even the levels of roadways kind of ties our hands a little bit on what we can assume in the future. And then some of the land use questions that are in place also would require some commitment from the towns and counties around the region to make some changes to make those things a reality as well. So it's a big, ever evolving evolution of planning, which is why we go back at it every 4 years. But I just wanted to throw in that financial reality piece of it too.
Thanks, Shelby. And we do have one more and then I see Donna has her hand raised. And so Donna, if you could get ready to unmute yourself. Well, we've just got about 2 minutes left, and we will stay on as staff and are happy to answer questions. But one more that we had in writing here is, where can we find the slide deck? Yay! So we will be posting that on this Triangle NCP Development webpage. I'll do it right after this meeting this evening, and there will also be a meeting recording online. Just want to do one more shout out to take the survey and share information about it with your friends. We don't have access in our MPOs to Nextdoor, so if you have a neighborhood listserv or work or have access to any of those types of forums, we would greatly appreciate any help we could get. Donna, I'm going to go ahead and ask to unmute you. Did you want to share your question verbally?
Yes.
Out loud?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Hi, I can hear you. Yep.
Good. So, question coming in, and I was on the survey when we did the forum with the big survey call and everything with transportation. But one thing that keeps coming up when I'm talking to the community is the transportation service with the schools. And I know right now it's sort of like we're not thinking about that because we're doing this online virtual stuff. But eventually, hopefully, we will get back to that. And I know it was mentioned and put on the foreground, that the transportation to the designated school locations need to be addressed, even if there's low ridership in that area. So like a feeder service or something, because you can't have, the schools operating and having functions when people who aren't driving or don't have transportation to get there. And that is a huge, a lot of routes were dropped here in Durham because they weren't highly utilized in other than, maybe the school hours. But it's still a necessary, they're part of the community. So that's just one thing I wanted to kind of, throw in there. I know there were a lot of options, about feeder services and that, but the schools, they cannot rely on school buses in between the day. It's only for pickup and take home. Anything else, people are relying for transportation, public transportation. So that was my question.
Thanks, Donna. That's helpful. Shelby or Andy, Shelby, I guess I'll invite you to take that one first.
Well, first, I'm assuming you're talking about public schools, like K through 12 schools, and not colleges and universities. I think a lot of the colleges and universities have their own, transit systems, and we kind of figure their work into our work as well. But I will say we also do that with the schools. I know you mentioned Durham specifically, and I can more speak to the Wake County side of things, but we do have a lot of our bus routes serving some of our high schools that are more convenient to serve, with transit, that are in the denser urban areas. Wake County instituted the Youth Go Pass a couple years ago, making riding transit free for all the kids in the county. And all the transit service actually is free. It's fare free this year, due to some COVID funding that we've gotten from the federal government and put towards that use. So I will say the school transport issue is certainly an important one. And I would say, just on the flip side of that, carpool situations around schools as well causes equal kinds of troubles. So there's both the bus access and the car access that can bubble up in that realm. And Andy, I'm not sure if you can speak more to the Durham side with public transportation and how it's hooked up to schools, but that's certainly something we look at on the Wake County side of things with our fixed route bus system.
Yeah, so I will say the model that we use has schools in it, put the schools in there, and we try to estimate where the future schools are. But to answer your question, we don't do anything specific to designate transportation, public transportation to schools during the kind of the off times, I guess. You can get from the school system, you get a ride to school, and you get a ride back. But if I understand your question, it's those off times when you're doing other activities and you don't, you stay after school or you leave early, that you don't have that service. Fortunately, a lot of the schools are built on some of our major roads, and those tend to have the public transportation. But I will say that I'm going to check with our transit system to see how they do their short-term planning for that, because I don't have an answer right now. I can tell you that we don't do anything special in our model to direct transit to the schools, other than covering the like I said, the major travel corridors.
Right. That's what I was saying. Not directly to the schools, but I know in the last budget they cut some routes because it was based on ridership.
Yeah.
And so some of the routes were cut, and children and parents, they had to go so far to even get to a bus stop, even just taking a bus that, is going on the road. And, and some of those bus stops are just not conducive to being safe. And I think where we are now, we have a chance to really look at it and don't go backwards and say, what does it mean where we could put kids or parents on a bus that they're going to places of destination that is safe? Some of those bus stops are like, you got to cross 4 lanes of highway.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not. I mean, we've seen the scenario of that.
If you could do me a favor and just take some time, my email address is right there, andrew.henry@durhamnc.gov. If you could send this or just remind me, I can follow up for you.
Okay, I would.
Because there may be something specific we need to look at in your case. So
I'll also, Andy, throw out there just a reminder that the transit systems are all undergoing their bus plan updates right now. That process just kicked off in the last couple of weeks. So over the next 12 or so months, they're going to be looking again at those routes and the more short-term things that they're trying to serve and how those bus routes are going to be run and prioritized. So I definitely keep your eyes peeled for some opportunities for engagement around that topic specifically.
And I just want to call out that Stephen has also jumped on the bus, not the bandwagon, but the bus on this question, and he is asking, pun intended, if, you know, how do we get more students out of cars and into buses? I think he's really more asking a rhetorical question, but with the statement that this could really dramatically reduce our early morning congestion. And we do hear that comment quite a bit at Campo and when we're out talking to the public. One other thing I want to do for housekeeping, we're about 5-6 minutes over. Again, we're happy to stay on, but I want to make sure that we thank you all for attending today's meeting. And again, encourage you to take a look at, take down some of this contact information.